Why is it so hard right now? If you're like a lot of my clients, you have been looking for a job for weeks, months, maybe even longer. And it's not your imagination that it's crazy and challenging right now. So, what the heck is going on? Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why this is particularly challenging right now and some tips to see how we can help you get over it. So there's a lot happening in the world right now that is adding to this set of complications in the job search now. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but some of the stuff that is going on is number one, employers are feeling very anxious about the state of everything. The world, the economy, if tariffs are going to impact them, you name it, it's on their minds. And so, what this means for them is that they're proceeding with a bit more caution than they ordinarily would, even at times they would normally be doing a lot of hiring. So, things like the start of a new quarter, the start of a new fiscal year, that sort of thing. Now, you will still see a little bit of an uptick in some holiday hiring, and there are some industries that are a little bit more stable than others, even though they may be a bit impacted by what's going on. So, for instance, healthcare has seen a bit of a slowdown, but not as significant as some other areas. There is some concern about whether insurance is what it's going to look like, how it's going to proceed, and the staffing that healthcare facilities are going to need based on that. But at the same time, healthcare is just one of those things that people always need, regardless. And so, direct service kinds of healthcare, so, CNAs and surgeons and paramedics and hospitalists and all of that, folks in those fields are probably still finding jobs with relative speed. But a lot of other industries outside of kind of general service industries are not seeing the normal kinds of growth that they would be seeing around this time of year, kind of going into the holidays and preparing for the new calendar year. Add to that the fact that it's a weird sort of hiring situation anyway. Markets are a bit flooded with qualified applicants, and there's not nearly as much voluntary turnover as is normal. So people aren't really leaving their jobs on purpose. People are certainly still getting laid off and fired and all of that, reorganized out of a role. But people aren't kind of holding up their hands and saying, yes, I think I will leave and seek something else, even if they hate what they do, because they understand that it's so strange out there. The challenges are so unique, and just everything is a little bit crazy. Then we also have an overabundance of fairly qualified people in jobs. And so some employers are looking to trim some of the fat, if you will. So you're getting a bit of kind of slower or non existent hiring in some of those mid to upper management areas as well. And of course, that also tends to trickle down to everybody else. Add to it the relatively new changes in how hiring takes place, and it just makes it a really, really challenging situation out there. So, among other things happening on that hiring side of things, is that first of all, employers feel like they're in control. They're the ones who are making all of the decisions because there are so many job seekers and relatively fewer jobs. So, this means that they're slowing things down. They're asking for multiple rounds of interviews. They're often asking for things like those one-way video interviews these days, where there's not a person on the other end. It's just you getting recorded answering a series of questions. They're asking for pre-assignments for folks to do um, five, six, seven rounds of interviews. So it's just kind of dragging things out a bit. And then once things actually begin moving, they're kind of going slowly in terms of making the final decision. So, they're probably going to ask for additional work after the pre work. So, you may have to do a presentation, you may have to do a project, that sort of thing. Then, of course, there's the whole relatively new phenomenon of applicant tracking systems. These have actually been around for a while, but the old-fashioned ones were simply word-to-word matching tools. And if you didn't have these particular words in your application, then you weren't going to get an interview. AI, of course, has changed that. So it's a bit more flexible, but it's also it's differently challenging, let's say. And so the AI, depending on the language learning model it's based on, and depending on what has been programmed into it, it can be a little bit smarter, if you will, and pull up things that are significant overlap with what is in the job description, but they're not very good at kind of making those one-to-one comparisons in the way that a human being would. And so we have the added challenge of the burden is on you as a job seeker to really demonstrate I have A, B, and C skills as they are listed in your job description. Even if you can get past the applicant tracking system, the next round of person to look at your interview is probably then not going to be someone who understands what you would be doing in the role particularly well. So, in a kind of similar way, you're going to want to be super clear about how your skills and qualifications match what they're looking for. And you're going to want to do it in a very, very quick way because, generally speaking, employers are spending roughly 10 seconds or less in that first pass through of looking at interviews. And so if they're not seeing it right away, right in front of me, I can see all of these things in the job description that I'm supposed to give weight to, they're not going to consider. This all happens, of course, before you even get to the interview. And so once you do get to that interview, you're going to have to reiterate some of what's been in the information that's kind of gone through already. And you're going to have to think about addressing your comments to the two different audiences because a recruiter, again, isn't really profoundly going to understand what you would be doing in that job. Recruiter probably has a list of things to look for and potentially a list of questions that the hiring authority has given to that person. It may be a team, it may be an individual. So, at this kind of front end of things, you are looking to be super, super clear. Here is exactly how I meet the qualifications that have been set out in this role. That is uniquely challenging. After, though, when you get past those first kind of roadblocks, then you're going to get hired by someone, or you're going to get interviewed rather by someone who does understand what you would do if you were hired into the role. So you also need to be aware of specific jargon for a particular industry, measures of success that might be typical in the field, all of that kind of stuff. This is often a little bit easier if you are familiar with a field, if you've gotten recent training on it, or if it's a profession you've been in. But the trick is kind of figuring out when you're going to deploy those specific pieces of information as opposed to the more general info. So this is all kind of how things are playing out in the world. And then there are a few additional complications going on in terms of finding things that you might want to apply for. There's, of course, always the question of what do you want to apply for? Separate issue for right now. But if you know what you want, one of the things you are almost certainly encountering these days are, first of all, scams. Those are perhaps not easy to gauge, but generally speaking, people will get kind of suspicious when something feels off in the process. Trust your instincts. If you are going through an application and something feels really strange and uncomfortable to you, go ahead and pull your name out because it is probably a perfectly good reason that you're thinking that. But scams are getting more clever. They're getting harder to spot, and there continue to be a lot of so-called ghost jobs out there. If you aren't familiar with ghost jobs, these are very convincing because they are probably actual job postings that have been used in the past or that people have written for a theoretical position, but there isn't actually a job there. They've put all this information out. It looks really good. It's tied to a legitimate company or hiring authority, but there's just kind of nothing behind it. And generally speaking, employers are doing this primarily for optics, also potentially because they're going to hire in a particular region at some unknown point. But the point is that it doesn't actually help you at all. These are really hard to figure out as you are looking through job postings. There's some advice out there that says if it's been up for a few weeks, it may be a ghost job, but that's also not infallible. So just know that of the things you have applied for, especially if you haven't heard anything back, those may very well be ghost jobs. It has nothing to do with you or your qualifications or how you sent in your application. All right, so given all of that, what do you do when you are looking for a job? So, because things have changed so much recently, it's a little bit of a new approach compared to potentially what you have done in the past. So, what I'm recommending is a pretty broad based approach to this. So, certainly continue to look at general job boards, places like Indeed and LinkedIn, whatever kind of works for you. But also be really thoughtful about the kinds of things that you are looking for. So, for instance, if you would like to work in a startup, if you find green jobs to be really important to you, if you would like to work for an LGBTQI plus owned business. Things like this are really worth keeping in mind, especially because there are some specific and unique job boards that exist around these. So if you really want to work for a BIPOC owned business, go online and search things like job boards, BIPOC businesses. Go to directories of local businesses that contain that kind of information. Be really thoughtful about it, but you can always Google best job boards, insert phrase here. You can also do this for job titles that you're looking for. You'll likely find some specialized boards. If you are a specialist in a particular segment or industry, you can also look for the professional associations that represent those particular units. So those would be things like the American Marketing Association and its local chapters. Uh, my particular um, primary, anyway, um, professional association is the National Career Development Association. So look these places up. Some of them have free job boards that anyone can look at. Some of them require membership, and some of them are kind of somewhere in between. So you'll see a few job postings, but not everything. So check those out and see if you are pretty clear about your field, if you're really convinced that this is the way to go, or if it's a field that you have been in for a long time, it's potentially worth joining or renewing your membership within the organization, as long as it's not insanely expensive. So that's one of the things you can do to kind of broaden your search. You can also look for very local job boards. So things that are unique to your area. Those may come out of places like workforce centers. Those may be funded by something like a state government agency. Look around and see, and you can pull things up so you can look at, best job boards, Washington State, and see what comes up for you. It may be valuable, it may not, but you will know that you have at least checked for your options. Another thing you can do is be really mindful of what your online presence is. This doesn't mean you now must go out and create a LinkedIn account for yourself. There are plenty of fields for which LinkedIn doesn't actually make very much sense. However, if you are in one of those fields where LinkedIn doesn't make very much sense, you're still going to want to manage your online presence. That means you're going to want to curate what comes up when people look for your job title, your industry name, maybe even you. And so that means things like if you have a GitHub, making sure that your content on there is up to date, that you potentially have some interesting other information there. If you have a personal website, that you are keeping it as updated as you can, adding new content, potentially blogging on the site, that kind of thing. And if you are really mostly using LinkedIn, be sure you're being as active on there as you can. The site's algorithm at the moment. It'll probably change. But at the moment, it rewards people for engaging at least 3 times a week. And so that could be reposting an article that you saw. That could be asking an intelligent question to someone who made a job posting. That could be certainly posting original content, maybe updating something in your profile, something like that. At the moment, the platform also really likes video. So if you have some short kind of comments that you can pop onto a camera and announce on there, it's also going to kind of give you some points for that. The point is, you want to know that you are doing the best you can to kind of brand yourself online. And then, of course, the other thing that you'll want to do as you're building this broad approach to finding a new job is to be very intentional about reaching out to people that you know. This is really what we mean by networking. Networking is not calling up a hiring manager and asking for a job. Networking is reaching out to your cousin who works in a similar industry to yours, keeping in touch with someone who reported to you 5 years ago, things like that. And then when it makes sense, reaching out to those people with maybe a specific ask. Hey, I'm really curious about what it's like to work at your current company. Could we hop on a quick call so I can learn more? Or an update or a question. Hey, Susan, I think you were due to have your first grandchild soon. Did that happen? What's it like? How do you enjoy being a grandparent? Whatever it is, right? But do be very intentional and clear about letting folks know where you are in your search process. Now, the thing with friends and family in particular is that we don't have normal conversations with people about all of this, right? We don't go to dinner with our friends and say, tell me about your job. And so you'll want to be very clear in any of the asks you're making folks about what it is that you actually want. So, big old crazy landscape out there. Do, of course, feel free to continue applying for jobs as you have done in the past and, practice your interview skills, all of that kind of relevant stuff. But do know that it's just a nutty place out there right now. And chances are very good that there isn't anything that you are doing wrong. You're just up against these strange new brick walls, and who knows how long those are going to stay up. So do consider things like stopgap jobs if you need to, and figure out what your best pattern for enacting all of these complicated things will be so that you can continue to move forward. Hope that helps. Good luck with all of this. Please let me know if you have any questions.